So I went to Yosemite, the most beautiful, wonderful place in the world. Go there in August. I won't be there. And I met two guys. The first one was shooting with a DSLR on full auto. He just got it before he went to the trip, and he was shooting on full auto. So he was wondering why he couldn't get the river to be blurred instead of, straight shots of it. And I tried to explain the basics of photography to him, but it was kind of loud. And he couldn't just understand the concept of ISO. I met another guy who he took beautiful waterfalls and landscapes, and he didn't expose them properly. So he had a valley that was dark, and then the bright sunset in the back, and the valley was underexposed, and the sunset was blown out. So I asked him why didn't he just HDR, and he said, "Well, I tried it and didn't like it." And he viewed photography as this big, complicated thing, and it really isn't. There's a whole lot of bells and whistles, but that's because of Japan. So all he had to do was expose for the valley, and then expose for the sun, and then copy the sun from one over to the other with Magic Wand and Photoshop. Problem solved. And so I decided that I would do a photo video on photography. I have a degree in photography. I've been working in the photo finishing industry for 25 years, so I'm an expert in it. In order to take better photos, you need to understand four things that are grouped in two ways. ISO and exposure compensation are linked together. ISO, shutter speed, and aperture are linked together. But before I can really get into this, you have to understand that photography is an art form. I mean, you're doing it for two things, money or love. You're doing it to take better pictures of your family, or you're doing it to convey something that you're taking a picture of and yourself, and be able to take that and convey the emotion you see when you see it and make it into an object or a digital file. And the second type of that is you're taking it to share it, not only to make it for yourself, but to share it with other people. So it's like there was this guy named Jackson Pollock. He was an incredible painter from the last century. He was a poster child for lung cancer. And he would dip a stick or paintbrush or whatever into paint and then splatter it. And if you don't understand art, you would look to it and go, wow, that's a nice drop cloth. But if you do understand art, it's emotional conveyance. Now, the way he was able to do that was through years of practice and through years of mixing. Well, if he had to go to a computer and then pick a color and then mix it into a mixer and then take it and shake it up in a little can shaker and then open it up and put the brush in and go, it would be horrible. But photography is like that in the sense that you have this technical aspect. And if you can get past the technical aspect, so you already know what it is, you don't just know, but you know, then you're able to just walk up to a scene and do all your settings and then shoot instead of having to get there and say, well, what do I want to do? Because you have to own it, okay? In order to own it, you have to understand certain things. ISO and exposure compensation are directly linked. Think of it as ISO is based on an exposure of a certain amount of time and a certain aperture, which will send a certain amount of light. So back in the film days, they made an ISO where the film lined up with the amount of exposure. And they took that and they changed the numbers based on how sensitive the film was. So in order to understand digital and grain and ISO, you have to also understand film. So they came up with 100 ISO film, and that was f8 at 1/60th of a second in direct sunlight. So you could expose at that, but you would get a certain amount of depth of field, stuff that's in focus. But if you wanted less stuff in its focus, you would put it at f5.6 and change the speed to 1/25th of a second. So the next thing you have to understand is the grain related to ISO. That's the little tiny dots that make up the image. On film, it was based on silver halide. So if you had 800 speed ISO film, you had this big, gigantic hunk of silver that was silver halide, and it's light sensitive. So light would hit it, and then the entire thing would be charged. It'd have a neutral charge before and a positive charge after. So you have this big chunk of silver, 800 ISO, and then you go down to 25 ISO, and you have this little tiny chunk of silver. So it's really easy to expose the big chunk of silver, and it takes a lot more time to expose a small chunk of silver. So as you go from 800 to 25, you have to increase the amount of exposure. Again, the exposure is the time plus the amount of light that's hitting the film. So the lower the number, the better the quality as far as grain is concerned. And keep in mind with digital that you can always add grain later. You're better off making a better image and then making it really grainy, and then you still have the better image if you want to do something with it later. So you're looking at 25 ISO taking a lot of time, but it also has a very, very tight detail versus 800 ISO, which is big and chunky and grainy. And you've seen them before, the 800 speed film that you got on your vacation and the little disposable camera, and the pictures don't look that great. And with an exposure compensation, generally you just want to leave it at 1/3 underexposed unless you're trying to get a certain effect. So say you have a middle grayish exposure and then there's some shadow that you want to bring out the detail in. So you're going to want to overexpose it by 1/3 or a half stop or 2/3 of a stop. And that's going to give more light to the dark parts and make it have more detail. Now, ISO and exposure are married together. You're basically, the exposure compensation is saying, I don't want 100 ISO, I want a little under 100 ISO or 1/3 stop. That's generally where you want to leave it. Middle gray is what the ISO is based off of, and that's great if you want to expose a person's face, but it's giving too much light to the sensor, and that kills your shadows and that kills your contrast. So just leave it 1/3 underexposed. At this point, I would like you to just bookmark the video and then come back to it and go outside and do two things. Play, and collect data. What I mean by play. Well, the first thing, you want to go find the things you like looking at. Take your phone out, put a voice recorder on it. If you're shooting with your phone, you can download an app for like $5 that'll allow you to have full control over the camera in the phone so you can make a lot better pictures. It's not just ting, 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 but you can actually control the ISO and the shutter and the focus and all that. So you want to go out and make a recording and play. Just go up to a scene you like and say new scene, give a basic description of it and what you like about it. You can do that before or after you take the picture. Then after you take the picture, I want you to take 5 more pictures and take a good 30 seconds to compose each one. Don't rush. You want to slow down. There's no hurry. This is supposed to be fun. You want to make a beautiful picture, and going up and rushing through it doesn't help. The second part of fun is I want you to go play in a busy place with lots of people. Just go around and just shoot things. Try to find stuff that's interesting. But spend 10, 15, 20 minutes walking around shooting things with people around you. Because there's nothing worse than getting out on the trail and you're taking a picture of something and somebody comes up behind you and you go, crap. And it just messes up the whole flow. So if you can get past that, it's really better for you. The third thing is data collection. At this point, I would like you to collect the data on what your ISOs are. So take a picture at 100, 200, 300, blah, 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 320. And you'll find that the lower numbers have sharper grain and the higher numbers have bigger grain. And by documenting all these, you'll be able to know what your camera is going to do at different ISOs. So I'm using an A6400 and 100 speed ISO is just the background's a moire pattern. It's nice and non-distracting at all, and you can barely see the grain on the image. And something like this big as a crop is on a 30-inch monitor is equivalent of a 4:6 print. So it's just a little tiny section of an image. And at this point, pixel peeping is just more, just because then you really need to see if your grain's going to cause you problems. So the older A64 6000 series, the 600 and the 6500, and it doesn't make sense that the 64 is lower than the 65, but they use the same sensor as a NIC 7. And 100 to 800 ISO on a NIC 7 has exactly the same grain. A6400, 100 is just beautiful. 160 to 250 is a little bit worse, but they're all basically the same. And then it gets grainier and grainier and grainier up to 800 ISO. 800 to ISO to 2000 is all the same grain. Above 2000, it's a land of graininess. So all of this information is stored on the picture when you take it. So you can just go out and bracket it, just set up the camera in the same spot with the same scene and just go through the ISOs. Aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. These are kind of like a triangle-shaped plate, and somebody's trying to balance it on a stick. And on each corner, there are quarters. So when you walk up to a scene and it's not the way you want it to be, it's out of kilter. So say you're taking a picture of a race and motorcycles are flying by, and you take out your camera, you put it to 100 ISO because it's a bright sunny day, 60th of a second at f8. and then you try to take a picture of the motorcycle and it's just all blurred. So you need a faster shutter speed. And even though it's a bright sunny day, you have two choices. You can raise the shutter speed by lowering the aperture, which balances it one way to get it flat the way you want it to be. Or you can raise the ISO up. And if the ISO is way too low and you raise it up, it brings it up to level. And you can have the depth of field and the speed for the shutter that you're trying to get. So they're connected to each other. Shutter speed is the amount of time that the sensor is exposed to light. So 1/ a number like 1/60th of a second is 1 second chopped up into 60 bits, and then the one slice is taken. So when you're holding a camera, you want 1/60th of a second minimum. With the new cameras that have image stabilization, you can fudge that a little bit more, and that'll be a 1 and a slash and then 60. If you have an exposure where it says it wants 2 seconds, it'll have 2 and then little quotes. And you want to go outside and take some pictures. Start out at 1/30th of a second or 1/30th of a second, and grab a stick or a twig or something and wave it in front of the camera while it's being exposed. Then work your way up to 2000, and you'll see what the effect is going to have on the image. So if it's 1/30th of a second and you're waving this back and forward, it's going to be blurry, and you can kind of tell where the stick is, but you can't see the stick. And 1/2000th, you're going to be able to, the stick will stop in midair. Aperture controls two things: the amount of light that gets to the sensor and the amount of stuff that's in focus when you're taking a picture. So if you have, the new cameras have really, really wide angle lenses, and it saves a lot of shots because even if the person has it at the wrong f-stop, they're more likely to get the more stuff in focus than not. And most people want more stuff in focus until you get into it. And you're looking at a wide angle lens like 18 millimeters, which used to be ultra wide, and now it's just wide-ish on a modern camera. It has a very curved piece of glass, and as you get farther, higher and higher in the size lens, you have more of a flat piece of glass. And what that's doing is it's bending the light more with the bigger curve to it, and you get more stuff in focus. F-stop related to lenses is that they have the iris inside the lens, and the smaller the hole, the more stuff is going to be in focus. The bigger the hole, the less stuff that's going to be in focus. And generally speaking, you want to leave it at f8. F8 will give you the best part of the lens because you're not bending the light too little and you're not bending the light too much. And you're going to need to find a shot or scene where you've seen those row trees that go down the side of a road. That would be perfect. And try different focal lengths of lenses, and then try it at different focal points. So how far it's 10 feet versus 100 feet, and you'll get the better feel for what the aperture is doing for you. And you want to try different f-stops as well. So the bigger the f-stop number, the more that's in focus, the more time you'll need. And you'll be able to start getting an idea of what you want in focus. And if depending on the shot, you want certain things in focus and you don't care about other things, or you're trying to get a specific effect. So you're going to want to go out and document that for yourself, and that will give you a much better understanding of your camera. Zappy! Zappy!
This has been a Poofy Hair production.